Yo, I'm just walking around Taipei, Taiwan. I've only been here a couple of days, but it is awesome. I'm having an extremely good time here. But I had a bit of a tough time getting here, transferring through China, through the airport in Shanghai. And I thought I'd do an episode about that. Maybe I normally wouldn't do a whole episode because it's like, yeah, okay, some airports, some countries are tougher than others, you know? Extra bureaucracy at the airport. It's not the end of the world, you know? It's not necessarily that big a deal. I might not do a whole podcast about it, except that it brought back so many memories. Being in the Shanghai airport overnight brought back so many memories of when I was in the Moscow airport overnight in 2019. So I think between the two, I think that's interesting. So I'm going to talk about China first, and then we'll do Russia second. Russia's a bit of an odd situation because 2019 was before they invaded the Ukraine. You know, I went through there just because it was a cheap flight. Obviously that is over, you know. I cannot support Russia anymore, cheap flight or no. So that was an experience that's not going to happen again. But it is one that I had, and remarkably similar in a lot of ways to passing through China. So to set the scene, I'm Canadian, and I'm like medium traveled. You know, I've been some places, but not really a ton. And I'm just generally ignorant about a lot of stuff. So I've been back and forth between America and Canada a whole bunch of times. That's probably where I've had the most friction crossing the border, actually, just because of the number of times I've done it. But also I've had some really easy times. One time, when I was living in Toronto, I had a trip set up to go visit people I knew in New York. And then there was a big apartment fire. The apartment I was living in, basically everybody had to move out. It was a really bad fire. So I thought I wouldn't be able to go on this trip because my passport was in the building. But then these firemen, they found my passport because it was in the drawer of a dresser, and they managed to throw the dresser out. They made a big hole in the wall mid-fire, and they were throwing stuff out of the apartment so there'd be less stuff to burn. So they threw the dresser with my passport in it out of the fire, but it still got singed around the corners. Like the edges of my passport were burned. And I had to keep my passport in a plastic bag because it smelled like fire. But I was like, man, this is a weird situation. I mean, all my stuff is already booked for America. I don't even have a place to live in Canada. I thought, let me just try it. Let me just try to go to New York, hang out there for a week, and then when I come back, I'll worry about finding a new place to live in Toronto. And as weird as that was, telling the border guards this story, pulling out my passport in this little plastic baggie, taking it out, you know, they're looking at it like, what the fuck is this? But they ran it through the scanner and it worked. And they let me in, you know? I don't think I would have let me in. I don't know if you should let the guy with the singed, burned passport through the country. So even though America and Canada is where I've had the most friction, still it's generally really not a problem. If they'll let me in those circumstances, it's not an issue, you know. And then I went to the Netherlands, and that was really easy. I was surprised how easy. That was the first country besides Canada and America I'd gone to. Japan was a little slower, but also very easy. South Korea was super easy because it turns out Canadians are on very good terms with South Korea. You can get a 6-month visa, not just a 90-day one. And then here in Taipei, I think Taiwan has been the easiest I've ever crossed into a country. It was unbelievable. It was nearly effortless. I had to fill out a little arrival card that I just did through my phone. It took about 10 minutes, and then that was it. They're just like, there you go on in. So that's the situation I'm coming from. The Canadian visa is, one of these many countries, most countries as far as I know. It's relatively easy to go from one to the other. You just kind of roll in, you talk to somebody for a bit, you fill out a couple of things, and they give you a visitor visa. So I was pretty surprised when I had a delayed flight that got me caught in Russia overnight in 2019. And just to put up me and the other people who had missed our flight in a hotel connected to the airport was bureaucracy, capital B, capital everything. Just, it was insane how long it took. Like I said, I'll get into that more after. But one of the guys who became my my overnight friend that day was a Dutch guy named Valentine. And, you know, we were talking about how just having to do everything in triplicate and how just inefficient everything was and how slow everything was and how paranoid everything was. And he brought up more than once, he's like, if you think this is bad, wait till you go to China. In fact, it was one of the last things he said to me, because we hung out all night in the airport hotel. And then the next day we were on the same shuttle to go to our flights. And it was one of the last things he said to me, was he reiterated about China. He said, China, it's 3 times worse than this. I know that's hard to believe, but it is. So I guess deep in my memory banks, I had a warning about China, but that was 5 years ago. Wasn't exactly front of mind. And I don't really know anything about China. I don't know much about anything, you know, I'm just kind of learning about the world as I travel around. I guess all I know about China is, you know, through my nerd lens of like video games and stuff. It's like, oh, you know, this video game had to make changes for China and X, Y, and Z websites are not available in China. Like, I can't think of any, you know, just whenever you hear news about China, it's never like, good news, China did this nice thing. Never. It's always, China, here's what China's doing, you know? But it's also outside of my experience that, yeah, just none of this stuff really occurred to me until it's in front of me. So along those lines, I booked a flight leaving South Korea, going to Taiwan through Jeju. So there weren't a ton of options. There's a lot less options from Jeju than there are from Incheon or Busan or whatever. But unfortunately, just bad luck, just an act of God, there was a typhoon that was possibly going to hit Taiwan literally the day I was supposed to show up here. So what was supposed to be just a half-day flight from Jeju to Shanghai to Taipei got canceled, but again, typhoon, act of God, nothing you can do about it. But I had booked through Expedia, and I was on the phone with Expedia and we were rerouting stuff. And I think it was a combination of we just both didn't know what we were doing. My Expedia agent didn't really know the ins and outs of China and the various laws for travel, and I didn't at all. So we were kind of leading each other down the wrong path, where I was also on the last day of my South Korean visa, so I was like, oh, I just need to get out of here, so whatever, I'll take whatever flight, I don't mind layovers, I don't mind if it takes days. Whatever, I just need to get going. And the Expedia people, you know, they're not necessarily travel agents, they're really just there to try to help you and kind of do as you direct. So the Expedia lady got me this new flight, which instead of one afternoon was going to take 2 days, but it was going to be from Jeju to Shanghai to Qingdao, I think the city was called, another city in China, overnight each time, and then to Taipei. And for other reasons, that flight also got canceled the next day. Different logistical reasons that don't matter. But even without that, the guy from the airline counter explained to me that this wasn't going to work. I just assumed, you know, I'm just going to an airport. Just going to this airport, going to that airport. I'm never going to leave the airport. I'm just transferring through the airport. And that just wouldn't be an issue, again, in all these other countries where, you know, I'm a Canadian, I can just roll in. You know, I can just roll in and go, hey guys, I'm here. And it's just not a big deal. Where he said, yeah, that is a big deal. In China, you can't do that. You can go to Shanghai, you can stay for up to 144 hours to transfer. None of this like you just live in the airport now type of stuff. And if you go to a second airport within China, that's traveling within China. That's a big no-no because that's what you need a proper visa for. And you can't just show up and get the visa at the airport. You got to do that ahead of time. who knows how long ahead of time, a couple of weeks at least. But apparently it's a pretty difficult batch of paperwork to do, so probably you want to set this up way in advance. You can't just buy tickets willy-nilly and go flying around China. So that was my first like realization of like, oh yeah, right. China's not like the other countries around these parts. They don't care that I'm from Canada. Being a nice Canadian is not relevant in this situation. And yeah, this kind of taking whatever random flights are available, transfer here, transfer there, Carmen San Diego, around the world in 80 days, just all this crap that you can do in other countries. You can't do that in China. So that's just good to know. That's good to know. Don't fool around with all these transfers through China. I would recommend don't transfer through China at all, but if you do, you got one. You got one shot, and then you got to get out of there. So I had to book another flight last second, spend way too much money, but again, this all originated from a typhoon. So, you know, it is what it is. So it was really weird actually, because there were very few flights left, especially because I had to leave post-haste. I actually did end up overstaying my South Korea visa by 1 day. And in those cases, if you're overstaying a visa, go track down an immigration officer in the airport right away, before the visa expires, because I didn't find an open immigration office. I dawdled too much and I didn't get to one until the next day. And then they couldn't help me. They could have given me an extension if I had seen someone the day before, but instead all they could do was give me a warning. So I unfortunately got a warning. Doesn't matter if it's a typhoon, doesn't matter if you bought the first possible flight to leave, doesn't matter if you did everything. You still got to get your paperwork fixed up before it expires. But that's fair enough. Again, you know, it's all learning. Eden Secret. Is this a sex doll store? Wow. Love doll. Yeah, look at that. That's how you can tell I'm in Taipei and not China. So yeah, this flight I ended up booking, very weird. It was really the only option. And all of the cheap seats, you know, were filled up long ago. There were none of them available. Then I was business class and they're offering me all this stuff and the fancy meals and the giant leg room and all this stuff. And it's like, who would ever book this? How does this make any sense that I'm living it up during the flight and then I have an 18-hour layover in Shanghai where I have to sleep on the floor? Who would ever do that? It makes no sense. But again, it was all just circumstances. Bad luck. But yeah, in Busan, because I'd already missed my exit date for my visa anyway. So it's like, well, okay, there's no point in staying in the airport and being miserable all night. I'll just go get a hotel for the night. So I did that. And then the next day off to Shanghai. So I guess one thing is, while in Japan, I guess there had been occasional air pollution issues, but they'd never been bad enough for me to really clock it, to really notice. Only in hindsight did I realize, like, oh yeah, some of those panoramas I saw in Fukuoka where things were a little hazy. Oh, maybe that was a bit of air pollution. But it's just, again, something that's outside of the sphere of my experience, because in Canada, if there is ever air quality problems, it's because there's like a forest fire, you know? It's a very direct cause and effect. Something bad happened, a bunch of trees burned down, the air's bad for a while, then it clears up. It's not a consistent situation. So I was pretty shocked when I got to South Korea, Seoul in the wintertime. I can't recommend that because, yeah, all of a sudden the air quality was terrible, like that I noticed it, that my lungs felt bad and my, you know, my throat burned and I had to start researching, like, what is going on here? And even just the view of the city. There's a lot of really good mountains around Seoul, but you go up and then you look out at the city and it looks like the goddamn apocalypse. And it's like, what the fuck is happening? So that's when I learned about the air pollution problems in South Korea. And I learned about the air quality index and got an app to check the AQI. And that became part of my life, you know, just getting masks, wearing masks, staying indoors, not going for hikes when things were really bad. And I could never get a full grasp on what was the cause of this situation. There's a lot of different stuff when you research things. I mean, it's probably just all of these. It's probably a combination of all these things, of yellow dust from the deserts, domestic pollution from Korea, the wintertime weather, which kind of like pushes the air down and keeps it trapped in the city, and China. And then, you know, some places would just fully blame China, but I don't think so. I feel like it's probably all that stuff, but there's no question China's part of it, because once I started looking at this app and just scrolling around and seeing like what the air quality is like in different countries, China is always just constant pollution all the time. It's like terrifying just to look at it on a map. And as I was flying towards Shanghai, I got to see that in real time. I was looking out the window and looking at these beautiful little islands and looking at how cool Korea looks from the sky, and everything was just gorgeous. And I looked out the window and I thought we were flying over a desert. And I was like, what the heck is going on with that? Like, I know I am generally kind of ignorant and I don't really know much about anything, but I wasn't aware that there would be a desert between South Korea and China. That's not where any of the deserts should be. But I was looking down and it looked exactly like sand. It looked like sand dunes. And then I saw a boat in the sand dunes, a big shipping boat. I was like, oh fuck, that's water. What the fuck? I was like, what is happening? And the whole way into Shanghai, all the water was that way. Everything leading up to the coast, and then once we got into the city, all of the rivers, everything was brown. And I couldn't look this up until later because I was never able to get on the internet in China. I'll get to that. So I had to look it up later, but what I found about that is that because of silt and sediment, some of it from like deforestation around Tibet, apparently, the water is just always that brown color. And brown is actually good in this case. Brown is not that there's a problem. When there's a problem, it turns red. And when it turns red, you know, it's hard to determine why exactly, but sometimes it is industrial accidents, provable industrial accidents, big spills that happen. And other times, it's like maybe there was an industrial accident or a spill that just nobody could confirm. So right away, it's like being in a crazy nightmare world. I'll apologize right now at the top for all future, you know, any future lack of tact, all future insults that come out of my mouth. I'm sure this will all sound offensive, the way I'm speaking about China. But yeah, if you're looking for good news, it's not coming. It's all bad news. If you're from China, I apologize. I don't know what to tell you. That's how this particular talk is going to be. So yeah, brown water, so brown that I thought it was sand. It didn't look like water. And I knew, you know, China's the land of pollution. Like even without being able to look it up, I just presumed it was something along those lines. But it still feels like you're in a storybook, you know, like you're reading a science fiction novel or a fantasy novel, like, you know, like in Lord of the Rings when they go into Mordor, you know, it's like you're passing into the evil territory, you know, like it's like, what the fuck is going on here? The water is the wrong fucking color. It's fucking crazy, man. It's crazy. And then we did, another thing that happened that was very unusual when we did land, is we had to taxi for an extremely long time. Really long. Way longer than I've ever experienced in an airport ever. So much so that I never really saw the airport. And I don't know for sure, but I wonder if that isn't just because it's a big airport and isn't just because the only available landing area was far away. I wonder if it was like a security thing. It would really fall into line with the whole vibe of how everything was while I was there. Maybe they don't want people to take pictures of the airport. Because Korea mentioned that, actually. In Korea, they did mention in the Busan airport, for military reasons, don't take pictures of the airport. But they just trusted us not to do it. maybe China just has people land very, very far away, so you can't take a picture of the airport, but that's just conjecture. I have no idea. It was like a really long time to taxi to the airport. And then when I got in, I guess the first guy I met, again, I guess none of this stuff is terrible. It is just hoops. It is just bureaucracy. But the first guy I met made me kind of hopeful that it wouldn't be that way, because there were these banks, big long banks of machines to take people's fingerprints. And there were some tourists, probably from Korea, because they were having a bit of a hard time communicating with this guy, but asking what they needed to do because they were there to visit China. So he was like, yes, you got to come over and do the fingerprint thing. I told him I was just transferring and asked if I needed to do it. And he said, no, you go ahead. So I guess this is one area where I guess I'm not sure. Now that I think back upon it, I was kind of wondering, how would my original flight, even if the typhoon had never happened, I only had a 90-minute window to transfer flights in Shanghai. How would that even have been possible? Because it was minimum 2 hours. Probably more than that, just to get anywhere. How would I have made the transfer? But I suppose maybe, now that I think about it, when I said I was just there to transfer, I wasn't transferring directly. I did have to stay in the airport overnight. So I guess that stands to reason that if I was directly transferring right there within the next 90 minutes, probably I wouldn't have had to do these extra steps with the fingerprints and stuff. But I can't say that for sure. I don't know. But maybe just a pure transfer through Shanghai wouldn't be that bad. So, maybe you could give that a shot, I'd still say if you have options, if it's, the same general flight package and one of them is through China and one of them's not, definitely don't go through China. But maybe if you are just directly transferring, it's a smoother process. Because I got to the next fork in the road, and yeah, that's where there was transfers from 24 to 144 hours. So I was like, all right, that's me. Oh yeah, I had filled out a card, an arrival card, on the plane, but it was of no use. The next guy was like, no, you don't need this one, you need this one. Go do this one. I filled that out and then did all the fingerprint stuff. So it's all 4 fingers on the left hand, all 4 fingers on the right hand, both thumbs, pictures. Then I had to go stand in a very long, slow line. But once I get to the end of that line, they scanned my fingers again, which was, I guess, that's the first, the fingerprint scans combined with a second immediate fingerprint scan. That's when it was very obvious that at this point, now that I was in the you're here to stay at the airport overnight line, now all fun is over. Now it is, because what could have even happened? Why do you need to scan the fingerprints again? What could have happened to me in the time that I crossed that room? It was essentially all the same big room. All I did was stand in a queue. I would have to be an X-Men shapeshifter for anything to conceivably happen in that time. I was like, what the hell? And then also very long, very slow process. Everyone's super unfriendly. Not transparent at all. And I thought maybe they had noticed that I was a day late leaving Korea, because I did have the little warning. And when the immigration lady did give me some forms, and I filled out stuff for Korean immigration and sorted that out, there was a space for reason, but it was written in Korean, so I don't know what reason she gave, but hopefully she said there was a typhoon. There was a typhoon and this guy didn't sort out his paperwork in time. I feel like I did have a pretty good excuse. But I'm actually not sure if that's what China was even noticing, because they sent me to another guy. I was the only one this happened to, so I was getting increasingly uncomfortable. And the only word they said that I understood was Taipei. So I don't know. I don't know if it was because I had a little blotch on my exit from Korea. I don't know if it had something to do with going to Taipei. But anyway, they took me over. did some stuff which I don't know what it was, but it was a whole extra page on my passport. I've got a new passport since COVID, so it only had 2 pages. It had 90 days in Japan, it had 180 days in Korea, and then a whole page for 24 hours in the Shanghai airport. But the guy gave me back the thing, and then I was finally able to go on ahead. And then after that, there was some kind of customs thing, which I really never understand what that is all about. I'm just like, I have my one book bag. Everything I own fits in the one book bag. I never buy anything when I travel besides food or just, basic stuff like toothbrushes. So I don't really know what all the duty-free shops and declaring stuff. To be honest, I really don't understand what it is or how it works. I'm always just a declare nothing guy, which, like, for instance, in Taipei, I literally just walked through a gate. I don't even know if there was a person manning it. Again, just that difference of they just trust in Taipei that, yeah, whatever, if you gotta pay, you'll probably go in the other line and pay, and if you don't, I don't know, like it's not paranoid. It's not like a fucking police state. Where in China, even just this stuff, even just this, trying to determine if you have taxable items or whatever, that was a whole lineup of like having to go through honest to God security and putting your luggage in a scanner. They did let me go through because I just had the book bag. It was people with bigger luggage they made go through. But between the fingerprints, the big long line, the secondary fingerprints, the visa stuff, and the customs, that was like at least 2 hours. It might have been more than 2 hours. So again, like I said, it's like, this isn't the worst stuff in the world. It's not like, I'm talking about human rights violations or something. It's just a slow process at the airport. But it's just that it feels so incredibly different to all these other countries. And not only is it a lot of hoops to jump through, and not only are people unfriendly, but the whole vibe is very threatening. All of the paperwork and just the whole tone when you're talking to people, but I guess specifically the paperwork, is always referring to not just fines for this and that, and like always worded as you will do this, you will declare this, you will not do this. Always threats of jail, Lots of threats of jail, just ever-present threats of jail all over the place. But then I was in the main concourse, Terminal 1, and I did see a Lawson's. So I guess that was a nice little thing. I had no idea what kind of stores to expect in China. So it's nice to see a Lawson's. And then later I saw a Tim Hortons, which being Canadian, that was like, holy crap, I really didn't expect that. I did see a couple in Seoul, but yeah, that was like, oh, neat, a Lawson's and a Tim Hortons. But once I was in the terminal proper, that's when the security and just the overall level of guarding and police was more apparent. I guess maybe it was a little less necessary in the first bits of the airport, but once I was in the open area, way more of a vibe of police presence and security everywhere. And I was walking around trying to figure out, I knew I didn't have to catch this flight again for a whole day till the next morning. But I couldn't find any info about the flight company I had, and I was wandering around, and there was, just even the vibe of the airport in general was really not friendly like a normal airport, not helpful like a normal airport. So I tried to log onto the internet. Silly me. And this is where I guess I really started thinking of Russia, because Russia was the only other place I can think of in the post-Wi-Fi world where I just absolutely could not get on the internet. So probably the average person would have a bit of an easier time because I don't have like a phone with a phone number. I have smartphones, but I just use Wi-Fi. I don't have an actual phone number. And that's why I couldn't get on to the internet in Russia, because I needed a phone number. They send a code to your phone number, you put it in, they confirm who you are. So I just had to have no internet. China had that option as well, but of course I don't have a phone number. So the other option was to take a picture of your passport, which seems so severe, but of course, then it's coming back to me like, oh yeah, Chinese internet. Oh, right, all that stuff that I vaguely knew in the back of my mind that I haven't had any reason to think about. So yeah, unlike the rest of the world where you just get Wi-Fi at a convenience store or at a coffee shop, or, there's parts of Japan where if you're just standing next to a drink machine and you bought a grape juice, you can get Wi-Fi from the machine. South Korea was amazing for Wi-Fi. If you just pull out your phone at random parts of, you could be walking around the perimeter of Jeju Island and you might get internet. If you're in a proper city, you almost certainly will. Now I needed to take a picture of my passport just to log on to the internet. And that wouldn't have been necessarily the worst thing. I'm happy to do it. It's like, whatever, I'm here, I'll do it. I'll jump through the hoops, I'll do whatever you want. You already have my fingerprints, let's go. But it didn't work. And I have 2 different phones and a laptop, and I tried them all. And this thing just didn't fucking work. It would give warnings and like, okay, this thing didn't work automatically. You can go try it through a browser, try that again. That didn't work. You could only do the passport thing through phones. Through the laptop, it was only the phone number. And then I eventually did manage to get it to go to the point where I take a picture with my really bad throwaway phone. I have one that is just like a real garbage phone that I just listen to like podcasts on and stuff, just as a crappy backup. So it has a terrible camera. So I was trying to take a picture of my fancy reflective passport in low lighting. It was a terrible blurry picture. I don't know that it would have even sufficed. But I managed to get that far, and then it just hung. It just hung on a loading screen, and that was the end of that. And I just eventually got tired of trying. I'm like, well, whatever, man. What the fuck ever, Again, I just want to check out basic stuff. Basic airport information is all I want, and I can't have it, so fuck it. I just stopped trying. Eventually, I did find an information desk. There was only one that I could find. And instead of, helpful, friendly, this was the opposite. This lady never made eye contact with me once, and she looked so uncomfortable. She looked like the last thing in the world she wanted to do was to stand there and try to have this conversation with me. And it was just in this eerie way, this creepy way that again started reminding me of Russia. Because in Russia, it's like, yeah, you can just feel it. You can feel it in the air that everyone here is not just living under an oppressive environment, but it has like formed them to be, if you just want to take the broad strokes version of the 2 philosophies, I obviously grew up next to America, and America is the land of entrepreneurship, the land of braggadocio, the land of if you got a big idea, say it out loud and maybe you'll get rich. And it's a bit of a brash culture in its own way, but obviously I'm North American. That's the side I'm on. I'm all the way on that side. Where in places like Russia and in China, I was now realizing, like, people don't have that attitude. There's those sayings in Asian countries, stuff like, the nail that sticks up will be hammered down, and just the idea that it's a collectivist culture rather than an individualist culture like North America. And that stuff's obviously true, but I still feel like there's so many branches between, me being a Canadian and the people I met in Japan and the people I met in South Korea. Obviously, the cultures are different, but there's a lot that feels the same. Maybe because I'm Canadian too, that might help a bit, that we are kind of the more timid, the more timid of the North Americans. We are more keep the peace, try not to make people upset, try to be polite, try to be nice. Take a few lumps if it'll mean keeping the general peace. We're a little more on that wavelength, I think, than, America. Sorry, America. I'm going to offend every country. Why not? But the people in China and the people in Russia, even though I was only in these countries one day, you just feel it so immediately that they are not equipped to be bold and to be brash and to be braggadocious and to be entrepreneurial. They're not even trained to look somebody in the eye. They're not even raised to be able to, they're just not raised to be autonomous, you know? I mean, it all feels like I'm oversimplifying all this, and obviously I am. I only know what I know, which is not a lot. But it's so undeniable. It's so clear. And it's the kind of thing I'd always heard about in my life, but I'd never experienced it until Russia, and then I experienced it again in China. And it's like, oh yeah, there is no question, this is different. Something is going on here that is very, very different from every other country I've been to. And that's the main point of this episode of this podcast, why I want to do China and Russia back to back, is about that. It's not really about, it's a little bit like here's what to expect at the airport, but it's really about that. It's about these larger cultural trends that I was shocked how indelible it was. I was shocked how clear it was with just a little visit. You know, like I try to pick up what I can walking around Japan, walking around South Korea, now I'm walking around Taiwan, trying to soak it in. I can't speak these languages, I can't read these languages. I only very occasionally meet people, but I always do eventually meet somebody, and I learn what I can. But in the case of China, in the case of Russia, I legitimately feel like one day, not even in the country proper, just one day in the airport of these countries, I know more about them than I do about, after 6 months in South Korea. After about the same amount of time total in Japan. Because it's just a much sadder, much simpler situation. But yeah, this information lady with her very alien demeanor, just not behaving like a person has ever behaved to me in my life, did tell me that I was in the wrong terminal. My flight is Terminal 2, I was in Terminal 1. So she said, go downstairs, follow some arrows, you'll get to Terminal 2. So I went downstairs and I went all the way to floor 1, but it turned out I had to go to floor 2 and walk down a corridor. Because I went down to floor 1 and I was like, do I go outside? Am I allowed to go outside? Because as I'll get into with Russia, you were not allowed to leave the airport. The airport was surrounded by fences and barbed wire. So I just kind of assumed at this point that China was clearly running off a similar playbook. Maybe it was similar in China. Maybe I could not leave the airport. But I think maybe I could have, because I did go downstairs and a bunch of the doors were sealed. I was not able to go out them. But people did keep asking me if I needed cabs. You need a cab? Where are you going? Nobody ever asked me that in Russia because I couldn't leave the airport. So perhaps that helps explain this level of fingerprints and scrutiny just to stay overnight at the airport, is maybe I could have left the airport so they had no direct way to ensure I was staying in the airport. I mean, I'm sure there was cameras everywhere. I'm sure they would have noticed if I left. But maybe that's why. Like maybe this just staying overnight was such a to-do because they had to give me a more or less proper visa, the kind that you normally have to book, a month in advance, just to stay overnight in case I left. Maybe if people do have a longer layover, they do go into Shanghai during that time. I don't know. It seems like they wouldn't let you do that, or they wouldn't want you to do that. If it's so hard to get a visitor visa, why would they give you one just when you roll in there that lets you leave the airport? But I'm not sure. Because I was looking at these doors and this door was blocked, the one next to it was blocked. And I guess somebody who works for the airport saw me looking at all these doors. And he came up, and I thought he was a taxi guy at first, but he's like, hey, I work for the airport. What are you trying to do? Where are you trying to go? And I said, I'm trying to get to Terminal 2. And he said, okay, go up these stairs, go down that overpass hallway. I was like, oh, okay, perfect, thank you. And that's where I'm just not sure. At first I was like, maybe that guy, maybe they just have people posted around near all the locked, unopenable doors. And if they see somebody eyeing the doors, go up and say, hey, what do you think you're doing? That was very much the vibe that I got. But I'm actually not sure, because maybe I don't know. I just cannot imagine. I cannot imagine, based on the vibe of everything else, that I could have just left the airport. I just can't imagine it. But maybe it was just coincidence that guy happened to notice me. And maybe he was being helpful. But nobody had been helpful yet. It seemed very coincidental that as soon as I was looking at a locked door and made my way to the next locked door, suddenly somebody was coming up to ask me what the fuck I needed, But then I walked down this hallway to Terminal 2. Long ass walk. That was another little moment that was nice after the Lawsons, is just the smell of Chinese food. I was like, there we go, that's nice. There's little restaurants and stuff dotted around. There's a pretty long walk. And then I saw ahead of me more security. Big time security. All the security people got to go put your luggage through a thing, got to go through the metal detector. And in the moment, I remember feeling like, Jesus, are you fucking kidding me? More security? Like, for fuck's sake, will you get out of here with this? Like, this is like becoming a bad joke. What is going on here? But then as I did think that through more, technically, once I got to Terminal 2, like I did go through this security, I guess ultimately, again, not that big a deal, whatever. But technically, even though I'd gone through security, I was still on land side, you know? Like, land side is the quote-unquote public part of the airport, because I couldn't check into my flight until the next morning to go through full security to get to the actual departure gates, because I stayed overnight in the airport in Calgary and had a really good time. Calgary Airport's a really nice airport. There's lots of places that you could easily sleep. It's very much set up to just be able to stay there overnight and have a relatively comfortable time. But I did feel a little more comfortable sleeping in the airport, knowing I was behind security. You know, I had arrived on a flight and just didn't go back outside of security. I stayed in the security zone. That wasn't the case in Shanghai. I couldn't go to the next step because I couldn't get my ticket until the next morning. So I guess ultimately, since I had to sleep in that part of Terminal 2, I mean, I'm not mad that there was security. I guess I like that there was security. You know, if there's going to be random people wandering around, I guess I like that they went through security. So my initial thought was, Jesus, I can't believe there's more security. But I do have to admit, when I thought that one through a little more, I was glad it was there. Like, if we're going to be in security land, let's at least be secure, right? Why not? What's one more security thing? But there was a lot, is the point. Security just at a much higher degree, a way higher rate than anywhere else. Even Russia, because again, I guess it's different in Russia. Because in Russia, you cannot get in and out of the airport. So maybe they didn't need security as much. And then once I got to Terminal 2, I mean, it was mainly just a waiting game. That's where I saw the Tim Hortons. There was a Family Mart in there also. And I actually did, I guess this is another nice thing, I found some items in the Chinese Family Mart that I had never seen in the Japanese Family Marts, and I haven't seen yet in the Taiwanese Family Marts. Just basic stuff, but like specifically it was stuff that was not especially sweet. I got an iced coffee that still had cream but not sugar. That's really hard to find in Japan. It was a nice dark roast, very tasty coffee. And they had a matcha chocolate cake thing where it was like a swirl of matcha cream inside a chocolate cake, but it wasn't sugary matcha. It was matcha that had a bite, that had a green tea bite that was a bit bitter. And it was fucking delicious, because I really don't like the over sweetness of stuff. And that's a big thing in Japan. Everything is very sweet. And Korea, actually. So I was pretty impressed with Chinese Family Mart, I gotta say. I really liked it. And then mainly hanging out in the terminal, I guess it was more or less normal, except that was the most security ever. Constant, just big lines of like 30, I believe they were like trainees, if not full police, maybe just airport security. But it very much was that vibe of like, we want to have these people stomp around and walk through the concourse and make sure that the feeling is there. Make sure that you are aware not to dick around. And again, all of the vibes of everything, all the language on anything was threatening. That's the best word I can think of. It's just a very threatening country. They're always threatening you. Hey, if you do this or you do that, or you break this law, or you make this mistake, threaten. Don't even think about it. And there was really nowhere to sleep, nowhere comfortable. If there were seats, they all had armrests to make sure you could not lie down. Luckily, once it got late, I mean, I did just lie down on the floor. I had a very bad time. But at least they didn't stop me, you know, because I was like, who the heck knows, man? Maybe for some reason you're not allowed to lie on the floor around here. I wouldn't put it past them. But no, me and some other people lied on the floor and had a bad night. And once I got through that last security thing, yeah, it was mainly more or less like a normal airport thing. That was at that point just waiting. But of course, still no internet. The last thing that I guess was notable is then when the morning finally came and I was ready to go check in for my flight. Again, everything just very slow and uncomfortable, and like, oh, this person makes you go talk to this other person, and I don't know, I always got the sense that like extra steps were happening, that they saw something on my passport that was like, go talk to someone else, double check with someone else. I don't know, maybe it was my imagination, but I was definitely anxious all the time. The last thing that I think is kind of useful to know is the lady in the Shanghai airport who gave me my ticket for my flight, whatever the flight company was, a Chinese company. They wanted to know if I had an exit flight from Taiwan, which I assume probably a lot of people do. Like if you're just going to visit for a week or two, you probably have your exit flight already set up. But I did not because, again, living in my little Canadian wonderland, it had never been necessary. No country had ever asked me for that. The very first time I went to Japan, I saw a little warning online that like they might ask you for your exit flight information. So I did actually book my exit flight that time, and they never asked. And then, that was 5 years ago. It just slipped my mind because I've never needed it in America, didn't need it in the Netherlands, didn't need it in Korea, didn't need it in Japan. But when the lady said I might need it in Taiwan, I was a little nervous because I, again, didn't know anything about Taiwan yet. I knew there was some contentious history between China and Taiwan, and some vague sense that, China considers itself to have a claim over Taiwan, but Taiwan is still an independent country. So I was a little concerned, like, geez, I don't know. What if Taiwan is like that? What if Taiwan is China Junior? What if Taiwan is going to want me to have the flight out? But again, I couldn't get on the internet. I couldn't check this with anyone. Even if I was just to go quickly book a flight, I was like, I guess I could actually do that. But I couldn't because I didn't have the internet. Just gave me a lot of apprehension that I didn't fucking need because there was nothing I could do about it. So I was like, I guess I'll just have to get to Taiwan and I'll just see what happens. But then I got to Taiwan, and like I said, it was the easiest entry I've ever had in my fucking life. There was a part on the entry card for what is your outbound flight? And because I did it on my phone, it wouldn't let me leave it blank. So I just wrote NA because it needed me to write something. And then when I got to the guy who was going to let me into the country or not, I mentioned, like, I'm not sure if I've got everything filled out properly. And he looked at my thing for like 1 second. And in perfect English, he just goes, no, you're fine. Go on in. And I was like, holy shit. That was it. That was the whole conversation I had with the guy. Like I said, it was the easiest. It was unbelievable. Which, in my privileged way, I feel like, yeah, I'm a Canadian. I have a previously spotless passport until I was 1 day late leaving Korea because of a typhoon. If you can't trust me, who can you trust? And Taiwan seems to know that. They're like, get in there, you. Get the fuck in there. Party's happening. Get in there. And I get in there and go to main station from the airport, and there's anime and video games everywhere, and I'm just like, I've been walking around Taiwan this whole time, and it's delightful. It's fucking beautiful, and I love it. And the vibe is completely different. This is the open, friendly, please come visit vibe. Where China, like, why would I ever? Why would I ever? I'm gonna really try to avoid ever even just going through one of their airports again. I can't imagine why I would ever fill out the paperwork and jump through the hoops and do all this stuff to visit China. Like, you're just shooting yourself in the foot with this attitude. It's ridiculous. But I guess, I don't understand the ins and outs of running a fucking dictatorship or whatever the fuck they have. But basically, China was flexing their authority and making me uncomfortable and threatening me with stuff till the bitter fucking end, till the last goddamn moment. But I looked it up, and it turns out why they do that. I didn't know this, but if you do get deported from a country, if you're not allowed in, if they deny you entry, the airline that flew you in is responsible for flying you out, which kind of makes sense. I guess I can see why that would be. And the other airlines of the fucking polite, friendly world, it's like, well, whatever happens, it's probably not going to be an issue, so who cares? Whereas these Chinese airlines, They're very concerned about it. They really want to make sure they don't get footed with the bill. So that's why they tell everybody that you need an outbound flight. So if something does go wrong, you've at least paid your own way out and they don't have to pay it. Again, just Chinese bullshit to the bitter fucking end. So yeah, at the end of the day, that's all. I just had an unpleasant, uncomfortable time getting through that airport. Way more of a process than normal. A very eerie window into the kind of lives people are living there. Where on the other hand, I mean, there's Lawson's and there's Tim Hortons, and I bet your average day-to-day life once you're in China is probably pretty normal. It's probably not that weird even. Maybe the same is the case in Russia. I don't know, and I'll probably never find out. But as an outsider just passing through, do yourself a favor and don't. There's plenty of other ways to go in the world. Plenty of other stuff you can do. Plenty of other options. The Russia flight I took that one time, it was cheap, but it wasn't that cheap. In fact, I don't know that it was even really that cheap at all. That was a flight from Amsterdam to Japan for about $700. Where this time I took WestJet, which is the slightly cheaper airplane company in Canada, from Montreal to Japan for, I think it was a little over 800, but I believe it was under 900. So, I mean, not honestly that big of a difference. And that was because it was the low season. I went during bad weather. I went right before they shut down that route for the year. That's not a normal price. Normally the price is way more than that. But there's options. There's plenty of options that do not involve Russia, even before all the Ukraine stuff, where now it's just absolutely not Russia. I'm sure it's the same in this part of the world. If you don't have to transfer through China, I'd say look at your options, because it's a real fucking pain in the ass. And in some ways I just look at it in a very childish way of you don't want to be friendly, you don't want to be nice to Canadians, fine. Go be unfriendly all by yourself. Go, you got 1 billion people, 1.5 billion people, you don't need me. I'm happy to go another way. So there's the China leg of the journey. And yeah, when I get to Taiwan, everything was fine, everything's been delightful, I love it. I absolutely recommend Taiwan. Again, I've only just gotten here, but I'm a very big fan of Japan. And I became a big fan of South Korea, but I actually think it was quite lucky that I have this golden Canadian visa where I was able to stay for 6 months, because Korea did take a little acclimating. It took a little getting used to. It really, honestly, didn't become a really fun trip until I'd been there for a while. Having the extra time really helped. But I would still overall recommend Korea. Just, I guess, do a little research, particularly about pollution and what times of year it's bad, and try to plan for that. Taiwan, so far, lovely. I absolutely recommend Taiwan. It's just, man, nothing bad has happened here. It's just been great. It's been a fucking great place. So it was all worth it, because I guess it was so much bullshit to get here. I was really starting to question, man, maybe it's about time to just go back to Canada. I'm getting a little worn out. But yeah, everything just flipped night to day between passing through China and getting to Taiwan. So that's the China part of the story. Now I guess we'll get into old Russia, because there's so many parallels and so much that's the same. And yeah, just that if you live in a dictatorial communal country, just how much different it is from an individualist country, but also a more or less open communal country. Like these other Asian countries, they may be communal, but they're not, that saying, the nail that stands up will be hammered down. It seems like in these other Asian countries, that is socially true. It's something that's obviously, there's no way I can really understand, but it does seem socially that is more or less how it is. If you stand out too much, socially speaking, you'll probably be hammered down. You'll be a little shunned. You'll be, they'll try to guide you away from that behavior. The difference in China and Russia is they'll just fucking throw you in jail. They'll just, it's not a social contract, it's the law. And that is a whole different level of fucking awfulness. It's just not a way that a country should be, I mean, yeah, you can make arguments that kind of make sense on a surface level of, like, you know, secure your country. You should be aware of who's everywhere at all times and try to keep everyone safe. But these other countries where we're all so much more relaxed, everything's going fine, man. The proof's in the fucking pudding. There's just no need to be that way. But I mean, I'm not here to try to solve the problem of dictatorships. I don't fucking know anything. All I know is what I saw. So now to get into Russia, what I'm going to do is I have another podcast called How to Write a Novel, where I've just been chronicling my slow, painful process of trying to write a novel. And I was doing that podcast in 2019 when I got stuck overnight in Russia. So basically, it turned from, let's not talk about writing for a bit. Hold on now, I need to talk about this experience I had in Russia, because this is some of the weirdest shit that's ever happened to me in my life. So it's kind of like the prototype for this podcast, in fact. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go get those episodes from 2019 and I'm going to edit them together, because it actually ended up running, you know, a couple episodes because I was in Russia for a while. So I'm going to edit those together, snip out any parts where I might talk about writing a book, because we don't need that right now. I'll just leave in the parts about Russia. And if you made it this far, definitely stick around, because the Russia story is way better than the China story. The China story is just, I had a really slow time at the airport. The Russia story, man, I met people, I did stuff, I saw things nobody normally sees. It's just fucking really cool in its own crazy fucked up way. It was a super memorable experience. And in fact, this has gone a lot longer than I thought it might. And the Russia story is not a short story. So let's split this up into 2 episodes. We'll make the next one the Russia story. There's oh, I see, they're selling lotto tickets. It's a store. I thought it was a dumpling restaurant because the little logo looks like dumplings, but it was called Father Rich House of Billionaire. And I was like, why would a dumpling place be called Father Rich House of Billionaire? But if it's a lotto place, it makes more sense. I'm not going to say it makes sense. There's a store called Bitch Taipei, probably a clothing store, but it's closed right now. I did see a store as I was walking around yammering about the Chinese airport called Lady Wore, W-O-R-E, as in clothing that a lady wore, ladies' clothes, the lady wore. But from a distance, when you first glance at it, it sure did look like Lady Whore. You know, just a weird name. Om Smoke Club, O-H-M. I feel like I could literally just walk around and read the signs. Could make a whole episode out of that. Super Pie. What kind of store is Super Pie? Okay, it is a food place. That's something. Because who knows, man? Could be anything. Yeah, so far Taipei. Delightful signs. And even just the walk sign. I looked it up. The Walkman, the red hand for stop and then the green man for go. He's animated here. And I looked it up on YouTube. Apparently it's been this way for like 14 or 15 years at least. Videos going back to the dawn of YouTube have videos of this little walking man. And stuff like that's so neat and just so fun, because I never knew about that. I never heard of that before. But it's really cool. Like, he's not just walking. He looks really cool. He's just like doing this cool pimp walk. Chili Mom Vermicelli. Family Mart. Maybe that one's not as weird. But okay, yeah, tune in next episode. We'll move on to Russia. Thank you very much for listening to that tale of the airport.